You're told inflation is an accident, taxes are necessary, interest rates simply reflect the economy. But what if none of that is true? What if the real game is designed to quietly drain your wealth while telling you you're being protected? Before we begin, make sure you subscribe, because once you hear this, you'll never look at money the same way again. Financial repression doesn't sound dramatic. It sounds technical, academic, far away. But it is the oldest, quietest, and most powerful tool governments use to take wealth from ordinary citizens without ever passing a law, without ever sending a tax bill, and without ever admitting what they've done. And right now, today, it's happening again. To understand this machine, you need to walk backward through history. Every time a government borrows more money than it can repay, every time debts grow faster than the economy, every time politicians promise more than reality can deliver, the same playbook returns. They can default outright, but that destroys confidence and political survival. They can raise taxes, but citizens revolt. Or they can choose the third option, the invisible option, the option that looks like protection, but functions like confiscation. They repress the value of your money while preserving the value of their power. The trick is so subtle that most people never realize it's happening. Because financial repression isn't a single policy, it's a system of levers stitched into the very architecture of modern finance. Interest rates set below inflation, restrictions on where money can flow, rules that force banks, pensions, and savers to buy government debt whether it's good or not. In a monetary environment where your savings quietly melt while the government's debt becomes easier to repay with cheaper dollars. It is the perfect heist. Not dramatic, not loud, just slow, relentless, and mathematically guaranteed. This story has played out before, always in moments when nations drifted too far into the red. After World War II, financial repression was used across the developed world to shrink massive government debts without telling citizens they were paying the bill. Savers lost value. Homeowners gained slowly. Governments walked free. In the 1970s, inflation did the heavy lifting, eroding the real value of public debt by destroying the real value of private savings. And in 2008, after the financial crisis, the West quietly re-entered an era of engineered low rates, capital controls, and forced demand for government debt. But the version happening today is different, bigger, heavier, global. Because for the first time, every major government is drowning in debt at the same time. The United States, China, Europe, Japan, the UK. The system is too leveraged to allow free markets to set interest rates, too fragile to survive genuine competition for capital, too political to admit the truth. So instead of real growth, regulators engineer compliance. Instead of opportunity, they engineer direction. Instead of prosperity, they engineer survival. And slowly, quietly, the modern citizen becomes the collateral. It starts small, lower interest on your savings account. Then it tightens, inflation creeping higher than the returns you can earn. Then it becomes structural. Pensions forced to hold government bonds, banks required to lend in approved channels, capital trapped inside the system. And all the while, governments congratulate themselves for stability while your purchasing power falls year after year. But the real question is this: how did we get here? And why is financial repression returning now, stronger than ever? It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a miscalculation. It was the only remaining option for a world drowning in promises it can't afford to keep. They never announce it. They never vote on it. They never warn you it's coming. Financial repression is the kind of policy that slips into your life the same way fog rolls into a valley, quietly, slowly, and completely, until you can't remember when you last saw clearly. What makes it so dangerous is that the people paying the price rarely know they're paying. There's no new tax bill with angry debates, no public referendum, no emergency broadcast interrupting evening television. Instead, it arrives dressed as recovery, stabilization, crisis management, wrapped in language so comforting it feels irresponsible to question it. And in that silence, wealth is transferred, upward, not in jumps, but in a steady drip that most people never trace. Financial repression became the default policy not because economists wanted it, but because governments ran out of choices. When a nation becomes too indebted to raise taxes without revolt, too indebted to cut spending without riots, and too indebted to default without destroying its credibility, it turns to the only remaining tool, shrinking your wealth in real terms while pretending not to. It begins with interest rates cut so low they barely register. Politicians celebrate it as boosting growth. Central bankers pat themselves on the back. But savers, retirees, workers, families watch their earnings evaporate. A savings account yielding less than inflation is a polite form of theft, a quiet extraction of purchasing power disguised as policy. Then comes quantitative easing. Oceans of newly created money flowing into financial markets, raising asset prices far faster than wages. Those with stocks, bonds, and real estate celebrate their rising net worth. Those without, the majority, fall further behind. The gap stretches quietly, invisibly, until the economy feels like a house where the upper floors keep expanding while the ground floor sinks. Capital controls enter next, but never by name. They appear as targeted measures, macroprudential safeguards, or limits to protect financial stability. In reality, they trap money inside the system, ensuring governments always have access to the nation's savings. You can move your paycheck, but you can't move your wealth. Inflation becomes the final instrument, the blunt one. Not the explosive hyperinflation that makes headlines, but the slow-burning kind that erodes value year by year. 5% here, 7% there. Enough to eat your savings, but never enough to spark panic. Governments deny it, adjust formulas, massage statistics. You feel poorer, but the data politely disagrees. And behind all of this sits the oldest dynamic of power. Debtors benefit when the value of debt falls. Governments, buried in obligations they can never repay honestly, need inflation more than they admit. And the easiest way to generate it without political backlash is through the tools that hurt savers most: negative real interest rates, suppressed yields, frozen capital, and a monetary environment where cash is a liability. The victims of financial repression think they're safe because they see no crisis. But the absence of crisis is the point. The system doesn't collapse. It just quietly reorders who gets the bill. The strange thing about financial repression is that it never announces itself. There's no speech, no decree, no dramatic headline telling citizens that their wealth is about to be quietly drained. It slips in the way fog rolls over a city, soft, silent, almost gentle at first. And yet, once it settles, it suffocates everything underneath it. Governments always claim they're acting in the public interest. They always frame their decisions around growth, stability, national security. But the truth no one ever says out loud, is that financial repression only appears when a government has run out of honest options and still refuses to confess failure. It begins with debt, not the visible debt they talk about on the news, the hidden kind. The kind that piles up behind accounting tricks, entitlement promises, unfunded liabilities. The kind politicians never plan to pay back because paying it back would require telling voters the bill has come due. When debt reaches a level that can no longer be serviced without political suicide, governments do what they have always done. They simply change the rules of money. Not loudly, not publicly, but structurally, deep inside the machinery ordinary people never see. Interest rates are held artificially low. Savings accounts quietly lose their real return. Inflation is allowed to run just hot enough to erode purchasing power, but not hot enough to spark revolt. Capital controls are slipped into regulations under the banner of stability. The tax code begins punishing the diligent and rewarding the leveraged. And in the background, central banks expand their balance sheets with a calmness that borders on arrogance. Financial repression is elegant because it feels painless until you add up the years. A family saving for a home wonders why prices rise faster than wages. A retiree notices groceries get more expensive though their pension hasn't changed. A young worker deposits money into a savings account and watches it shrink in real terms. Everyone works harder, yet somehow ends up with less. Meanwhile, asset owners watch their wealth compound. Not because they're smarter, not because they've taken more risk, but because the system simply tilts in their direction. Financial repression creates winners and losers, but the winners are never chosen democratically. They're chosen by proximity to the monetary spigot. Governments deny responsibility. Central banks cite global conditions. Economists on television talk about temporary pressures. But the script is ancient. This isn't innovation. It's not a modern invention. It's the oldest trick in the political toolbox, dressed up in modern language. Rome did it with coin clipping. Britain did it with debased silver. The French monarchy did it with assignats. Weimar Germany We know how that story ended. And today, financial repression hides behind interest rate policy, quantitative easing, and macroprudential management. Different century, same playbook, same victims. Because at its core, financial repression is not an economic policy, it's a transfer of power. Every point of inflation, every suppressed interest rate, every capital restriction is a quiet confession that the government has failed at stewardship and now must ask citizens to absorb the cost of that failure, silently. And the cruelest part? Most people never realize it's happening. They blame themselves, their job, their timing, their luck, their generation. They never suspect the truth. The system was calibrated to make them fall behind. And the more debt a nation carries, the more aggressive the repression becomes. Because once a country crosses a certain threshold, growth is no longer enough to save it. Only erosion, slow, invisible erosion of everyone's savings, keeps the machine alive. Governments will never phrase it this way. They'll talk about stability, recovery, necessary reforms, temporary adjustments. They will wrap the policy in patriotism and caution. But underneath all that language sits a blunt, mathematical reality. They need your wealth to survive. And they will take it, not by force, but by design. When financial repression reaches maturity, people don't notice the wealth disappearing anymore. The system numbs them. Inflation becomes normal. Low interest rates feel permanent. Asset bubbles feel like opportunity. The economy feels manageable. Until the moment it doesn't. That moment comes without warning. A currency devalues. A bond market seizes. A central bank emergency meeting spills over into a midnight press conference. Suddenly, the policy meant to protect the system becomes the reason the system can no longer be protected. And the government, once again, steps in with a solution. The very same government that created the problem. This is where the next phase begins and where the real danger hides. And once you understand how financial repression truly works, you realize the most dangerous part isn't the policy itself. It's the silence around it. Because governments will tell you everything except the one thing that actually matters. They need your money more than you need theirs. They always have. The moment a nation drowns itself in debt, the calculus shifts. The government stops thinking like a steward and starts thinking like a debtor cornered by its own decisions. And debt doesn't care about ideology. It doesn't care about promises. Debt demands to be paid, and when the bill reaches a scale too large for politics to handle, leaders quietly turn to the oldest trick in the book, shrinking the value of your savings so their obligations look smaller on paper. It starts with interest rates that fall a little too low and stay low far too long. They call it supporting the economy, but the truth is simpler. Low rates make government borrowing cheap. Then inflation creeps in, slowly at first, like humidity rising in a room, just enough to wear down the value of every dollar you hold. And one day you look at a grocery bill and realize the math has changed. Not because your money grew, but because your government needed it to shrink. Financial repression is the invisible tax, the kind you never vote on, the kind no politician campaigns for, but the kind every modern economy uses when it runs out of options. The most unsettling part? It's not new. It's not even clever. It's a recycled mechanism, perfected by struggling empires and indebted kings for centuries. Rome debased its coins. Medieval monarchs shaved their silver. 20th century governments hid inflation behind patriotic slogans. Today's repression is simply polished, digitized, and dressed in economic jargon to keep you from seeing the teeth beneath the fabric. And while news headlines talk about cost of living, market volatility, and uncertainty, the real operation hides beneath the surface. Your savings, your pensions, your wages, they're all being diluted to solve a problem you didn't create. Governments don't have many tools, but they have this one, and they wield it quietly. The pressure builds in slow, invisible layers. The central bank adjusts its balance sheet, bond yields flatten, deposit rates freeze. Credit becomes essential to stay afloat. And the public, unaware of the architecture being constructed around them, adapts without realizing they're adapting. They work more hours. They take on more debt. They settle for less, all while believing the struggle is personal, not systemic. That is the genius of financial repression. It hides in everyday life. Most people never question why savings accounts pay nothing, why wages drift while asset prices explode, why housing becomes unreachable, why cash loses value year after year, even in stable economies. But the people who understand the mechanics, they position themselves above the system, never inside it. The wealthy move capital into assets that rise faster than money decays. Politicians protect themselves through allowances, indexed benefits, and connections. Corporations shield their profits through buybacks and offshore structures. Meanwhile, the average citizen holds the one thing the system needs: currency that can be quietly harvested through inflation. And the playbook deepens as technology expands. Digital payments, central bank digital currencies, automated taxation, real-time financial surveillance. Tools of convenience, yes, but also tools of control. Because when governments can't default openly, they default silently. And the most efficient silent default? Making your money worth less tomorrow than it was today. That is financial repression, a silent thief with a government badge. The moment the illusion finally cracks never arrives with fireworks. It arrives quietly, like a soft click inside a rusting machine. The moment a system crosses the line where control stops being control and starts becoming exposure. And in the era of financial repression, that moment is happening now, beneath everyone's feet, without a single announcement. By the time ordinary people realize what's happening, their wealth is already gone. The government doesn't need to raise taxes when it can simply choke the value of your money. It doesn't need to seize assets when it can trap them behind negative real interest rates. It doesn't need to pass new laws when it already controls the invisible levers: the yield curve, the money supply, the price of risk, your access to credit, the liquidity in your own bank account. This is the part of the system that was never meant to be seen. The real shock comes when people compare their bank balances to their lives. They see the same number on the screen, but it buys half of what it did. Their savings haven't been stolen, yet somehow the theft is complete. Their work is the same, but the reward has evaporated. Their spending hasn't changed, but the cost of existence has become a staircase with missing steps. Financial repression isn't a policy, it's a quiet suffocation. And the climax arrives when the state crosses the threshold from managing the economy to needing your savings to survive. Every modern government, drowning in debt, clings to the same playbook: inflate away the liabilities, starve savers of yield, trap capital, and hope the public never notices. But they always notice, too late. Across history, financial repression peaks at the same moment trust collapses. People rush to convert their money into anything real: gold, land, commodities, foreign currencies, even riskier assets, anything not controlled by the system. That panic is the telltale sign, not loud, but unmistakable. A society that no longer believes its own currency is a society preparing for escape. And that's when governments tighten the cage. Capital controls, withdrawal limits, temporary, emergency measures that never expire, central bank digital currencies designed not to free money, but to fence it in. The entire strategy is revealed in one terrifying truth: your money is no longer yours. It's the state's survival mechanism. And the moment financial repression reaches full maturity, the state isn't trying to guide the economy anymore. It's extracting value from its citizens like a collapsing empire draining the last remaining provinces. This is the point no one wants to admit. Financial repression isn't about protecting the system. It's about preparing it for the day the system finally breaks. And the cost, the true cost, is paid not by governments, not by banks, not by the wealthy, but by the ordinary saver who wakes up realizing the real theft happened in silence, year after year, while they were told everything was under control. That's the climax of financial repression. The moment the public understands the trap was never built around the economy. It was built around them. The truth about financial repression is that it never announces itself. It doesn't march through the streets or appear in breaking news headlines. It's quiet. It's procedural. It's paperwork, meetings, memos, and policies that feel boring until you realize they've rearranged your entire economic life without asking for your permission. By the time most people understand what's happening, the walls have already moved in. Their savings buy less. Their wages lag behind inflation. Their investments barely outpace the silent taxes placed on them. Their freedom becomes measured not in opportunity, but in what's left after the system harvests its share. And the most unsettling part? Financial repression isn't a glitch of the modern system. It is the modern system. a machine built to protect governments from their own debts by quietly transferring the burden onto the public. A system that thrives when you're distracted, complacent, or hopeful that things will eventually go back to normal. But history shows they never do. Every era of financial repression ends the same way. The old system runs out of tricks, trust collapses, and the people who understood the game early are the only ones prepared for what comes next. If you're watching this, you already know your wealth will not protect itself. So stay aware, stay curious, and stay ahead of the system designed to keep you in the dark. Subscribe for more documentaries that reveal the machinery operating behind your money and the parts they never want you to see.